The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby of Polaris Defense Technologies, and I stepped through with my briefcase in hand and 15 years of loyalty riding on my shoulders. What happened next is burned into my memory for good. Nina Ashcroft. The voice cracked across the atrium like a gunshot. Every head in the lobby turned. Stay right where you are. Barrett Thornhill closed the distance, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that felt more like an execution than a walk. The new owner, or so he believed, had arrived 3 days earlier with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. 2 security guards I'd known for years trailed behind him, faces carefully blank, along with his assistant, a sharp-featured woman gripping a tablet like a weapon. "You're looking at a redundant line item," Barrett announced, pitched loud enough for the whole morning crowd to hear. Employees froze mid-step. The receptionist's fingers stopped over her keyboard. "Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The lobby had turned into a stage, and I was the unwilling centerpiece of Barrett's power move. My pulse was hammering, but I held my expression steady. For weeks earlier, I'd signed the paperwork that made this moment both brutal and, underneath it, deeply satisfying. Barrett Thornhill had no idea what was coming, but I'm ahead of myself. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where stories of workplace justice unfold on karma's own schedule. Before we get into how this confrontation turned into Barrett's worst nightmare, if you're into stories about pushing back on toxic leadership and workplace accountability, the subscribe button's right there. We're working towards 7,000 subscribers, and every subscription tells us this community believes in these stories of resilience and justice. So let me tell you who I am, and how a girl who grew up understanding the value of every single dollar ended up holding the fate of a defense contractor in her hands. My name is Nina Ashcroft, and for 15 years I served as Chief Operating Officer at Polaris Defense Technologies. We built advanced navigation systems for military and aerospace use, the precision instruments guiding everything from fighter jets to satellite networks. I wasn't born into privilege. My father worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My mother stretched every paycheck until it screamed. They taught me that empathy wasn't weakness, and that understanding people's struggles made you stronger, not softer. That upbringing shaped how I led. When our night shift supervisor's daughter got sick, I rebuilt his schedule myself. When budget cuts were unavoidable, I trimmed executive perks before I touched a single line worker's benefits. The people at Polaris weren't resources to manage. They were human beings with mortgages, dreams, and families counting on them, which made everything that followed that much worse. 3 months before that lobby confrontation, our founder and CEO, Howard Gallagher, called me into his office. At 73, Howard had turned Polaris from a garage startup into a $250 million company. The deep lines around his eyes carried decades of work perfecting gyroscopic stabilizers and GPS enhancement systems that kept our military's best safe. "Nina, sit down." His voice held a weariness I'd never heard from him before. "I'm selling the company." The words landed like a punch. "Howard, what? Why? My health isn't what it used to be." He gestured toward the pill organizer on his desk, a rainbow of medical necessity. "Cardiologist says I need less stress. My wife says if I don't listen, she'll reduce it for me by becoming a widow who doesn't have to worry about it anymore." Despite everything, I smiled. Miriam Gallagher never made idle threats. "I've got a buyer lined up," Howard continued. "Fellow named Barrett Thornhill. Made his fortune in private equity, buys up mid-sized companies and streamlines them for profit. He's offering a price that'll set up my grandkids' grandkids." Something in my gut twisted. Streamlining usually means layoffs. He assured me he'd keep our culture intact and hold on to key personnel. Howard's eyes met mine. "That means you, Nina. You've been the operational backbone of this company since you started as a junior systems analyst." I made it a condition of sale that leadership stays put. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that 15 years of loyalty and results would count for something. But I'd watched enough corporate acquisitions to know that promises made mid-negotiation tend to evaporate the second the ink dries. "There's something else," Howard said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Before I finalize anything with Thornhill, I want you to know you have options. There's a private investment group that's been quietly interested in Polaris. Slightly less money, but their terms keep our workforce intact and promote from within. You'd have a board seat. I opened the folder. The letterhead read Ashford Equity Trust. The proposal was thorough and professional, and considerably less lucrative for Howard than Thornhill's offer. Why show me this? I asked. Because in 2 weeks I'm making my final call, and I want the read of someone who actually cares about this company beyond the balance sheet. Thornhill's money is tempting, Nina. I won't pretend otherwise. But if you think the other option is better for Polaris and its people, tell me. Your opinion matters here. I spent the next week tearing into both offers with the same thoroughness that had defined my whole career. Thornhill's proposal was aggressive on paper. Immediate capital, new markets, heavy R&D funding. Impressive at a glance. But the footnotes told a different story. Buried in subsection 7.3, language about operational efficiency optimization within the first fiscal quarter. Section 12.4, legacy personnel cost restructuring. Clause 19.2, unilateral authority for Thornhill to alter executive compensation and benefits at will. Ashford Equity Trust's proposal was more conservative but far more transparent. Explicit workforce protections, ambitious but achievable growth targets, and a governance structure that reserved seats for current leadership and employee representatives. I set a meeting with Howard for the following Monday, analysis in hand. Sunday night everything changed. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Howard's number. Nina. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm at Mercy General. Heart attack. Not sure how much runway I've got to handle this the right way. Tomorrow morning I'm signing with Thornhill. His lawyers can move fast, and Miriam needs this settled. I can't leave her holding this if something happens to me. Howard, wait. No time to wait. I trust you to make the best of it. You're the strongest leader I know. If anyone can work with Thornhill and protect our people, it's you. A pause, his breathing labored. I'm sorry, Nina. I'm just out of runway. The call ended. I sat in my dark living room, staring at the analysis I'd built, the warnings I'd documented, the alternative I'd been ready to recommend. None of it mattered now. The sale to Barrett Thornhill closed within 48 hours. Howard recovered just enough to sign from his hospital bed, his hand shaking as he handed 30 years of dreams to a man who saw Polaris as inventory. Barrett showed up the following week trailing an entourage of consultants, tablets in hand, wearing barely concealed contempt for everything that made Polaris what it was. The motivational posters in the break room gone, Howard's profit-sharing program, suspended pending review, the quarterly town halls where employees could ask leadership anything, canceled as inefficient. I tried to get time on Barrett's calendar to talk operational continuity. His assistant emailed back that my input would be solicited if and when Mr. Thornhill deemed it necessary. 3 days into his takeover, Barrett called his first executive meeting. I arrived with decks on current projects, workforce development, and the strategic partnerships we'd built over years. Barrett sat where Howard used to sit, radiating ownership. Around him, a new CFO fresh out of business school, a VP of strategy who'd never spent a day in defense contracting, and a director of human capital who referred to our employees as human units. Let's set some ground rules, Barrett began, no preamble. This company's been run like a social club. That ends today. We're here to generate returns, not feelings. Every department gets an efficiency review. Every position has to justify its existence. Every expense gets scrutinized. He turned to me. Nina, you've been COO for what, a decade? 15 years in leadership roles. 10 as COO. I corrected. And in that time, operational costs are up 37%. Revenue is up 212% over that same window, I countered. Our margins are among the best in the industry, client retention's at 98%. Those costs reflect strategic investment in talent and technology that drove that growth directly. Barrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Or they reflect bloated spending I'm here to fix. We'll see which read holds up under analysis. The meeting dragged on 2 more hours. Every initiative I'd built got questioned. Every relationship I'd cultivated got waved off as inefficient networking. Every employee benefit got recast as unnecessary overhead. I left knowing my runway at Polaris was short. Barrett wasn't interested in collaboration. He was hunting for casualties to prove he was serious. I'd watched this play before. New ownership arrives, fires a high-profile executive or two to signal change, installs their own people, and doesn't think twice about the institutional knowledge lost in the process. That night I did something I'd never done. I dialed the number on the Ashford Equity Trust proposal. A woman picked up on the second ring. Ashford Equity Trust. This is Lillian Ashford speaking. Ms. Ashford, this is Nina Ashcroft from Polaris Defense Technologies. Apologies for the late call. Your firm submitted a proposal to acquire Polaris a few weeks back. I'm calling to ask whether that's still on the table in any form. A pause. Ms. Ashcroft, I'm aware of the situation at Polaris. I'm also aware Howard Gallagher finalized the sale to Barrett Thornhill last week. What exactly are you proposing? I took a breath. Thornhill bought the primary stake from Howard, but there are still floating shares out there, original seed investors, early employees with equity, that kind of thing. Most of them want out now, especially watching what Barrett's doing. If someone acquired just enough more, they'd have controlling interest at 51%. And you think Ashford Equity should chase that? No, I said quietly. I think I should. Another pause, longer this time. You want to acquire controlling interest in a $250 million defense contractor? Ms. Ashcroft, do you have that kind of capital? I've got $401,000 in savings, equity in my house, and 15 years of stock options vesting next month. With some strategic borrowing I can get to maybe $8 million. But I'm hoping someone who believes in doing business the right way might want to partner on the rest. Lillian Ashford laughed, not mockingly but genuinely impressed. You're proposing I help you stage a hostile takeover of the company you currently work for. I'm proposing we save a company from being gutted by someone who treats human beings like line items. Howard Gallagher built something good. It deserves better than Barrett Thornhill. Tell me what happens when Thornhill fires you before this comes together. Because from what I've heard of his style, you're probably at the top of that list. Then I'll own controlling interest in a company that just fired me, and the annual shareholder meeting is going to be very interesting. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Lillian spoke again, a new edge of respect in her voice. I'll have my lawyers draw up a partnership agreement. You bring your capital and your shares. We finance the rest. Ashford Equity takes 30% of whatever we jointly acquire, you take 70%, and we both get board seats once this becomes public. We'll structure it through a blind trust so Thornhill doesn't see it coming until it's too late. Why are you willing to do this? I asked. Because I've spent 20 years watching vulture capitalists gut good companies for short-term profit. Because I think Barrett Thornhill embodies everything wrong with modern corporate culture. And because I like people with the nerve to bet everything on doing the right thing. The next 2 weeks blurred into legal documents, financial transfers, and quiet negotiation. Lillian's team worked with surgical precision, approaching the scattered shareholders who held fragments of Polaris. Most jumped at the chance to sell. Barrett's arrival had spooked them, and they wanted out before the ship started taking on water. We ran everything through a blind trust. The paperwork showed shares moving to A&A Holdings LLC, Ashford Nina Alliance, though anyone digging would find nothing but a generic investment vehicle with opaque ownership. Perfectly legal. Perfectly invisible. I liquidated everything, my retirement account, my emergency fund, the stock options I'd earned through years of 60-hour weeks and weekend fire drills. I took out a second mortgage on my townhouse. My financial advisor practically begged me to reconsider. Nina, you're betting your entire financial future on this. Roger pleaded in our final meeting. If it doesn't work, you're 52 with no job, no savings, and a mountain of debt. I can't in good conscience recommend this. Roger, I appreciate the concern. But this isn't just about money. It's about 473 employees who depend on Polaris for their livelihoods. It's about Department of Defense contracts that keep our service members safe. It's about honoring what Howard built. So yes, I'm betting everything. Because some things are worth the risk. I signed the papers. Every dollar I'd ever saved, every ounce of security I'd built, all of it went into acquiring 11.3% of Polaris Defense Technologies. Combined with Barrett's 60%, that put 71.3% of the company accounted for. But here's what Barrett didn't know. His actual purchase from Howard only covered 48.7%. The remaining 11.3% of Howard's original stake sat in a separate family trust that had never been part of the primary sale, a detail Barrett's lawyers had either missed or dismissed as irrelevant. Lillian's team acquired that 11.3% directly from Howard's family trust. Combined with the shares bought from scattered investors, A&A Holdings LLC now controlled 51.2% of Polaris Defense Technologies. Barrett Thornhill wasn't the majority owner. I was. The paperwork was filed with the state on a Tuesday morning. The trust deed officially recorded. Legally, irrevocably, I now controlled the company I'd spent 15 years climbing from analyst to COO. And Barrett had absolutely no idea. The annual shareholder meeting, where ownership percentages would be disclosed and board seats allocated, was 6 weeks out. That's when Barrett would learn his hostile takeover had been quietly undone by the very executive he was busy dismantling. I didn't expect what happened next. Thursday morning, 3 days after the trust deed was recorded, Barrett's assistant sent a company-wide email announcing an immediate organizational restructuring. Attached, a document eliminating 43 positions, manufacturing leads, senior engineers, department coordinators, people who'd given decades to Polaris, reduced to names on a termination list. My assistant Roger, a different Roger than my financial advisor, appeared in my doorway, pale. "Nina, you need to see this." He handed me a printed copy. I scanned the names, my stomach dropping with each one. Timothy Reeves, our lead manufacturing supervisor, who'd perfected our guidance system calibration process. Amanda Westfield, whose quality control protocols had produced 6 straight years of 0 defects. Jackson Hunt, the training coordinator who'd personally mentored over 100 new hires. "There's more," Roger said quietly. "Barrett's called an all-hands for tomorrow morning. Word is he's announcing additional changes. People are scared." I stared at the list, rage and helplessness tangled together in my chest. I owned controlling interest in this company, but the shareholder meeting was still 6 weeks off. Barrett could do a tremendous amount of damage in 6 weeks. I could file an emergency action to disclose the ownership change, but Lillian's lawyers had been firm. Premature disclosure could open procedural challenges. We needed the scheduled meeting to make it ironclad. 6 weeks. 42 days for Barrett to tear apart everything Howard built. Unless I forced his hand. Friday morning arrived heavy with inevitability. Employees packed into the main lobby, which Barrett had chosen over our usual auditorium. A deliberate power move, forcing people to stand crowded together instead of sit with any dignity. Barrett stood on the second-floor mezzanine, looking down at the assembled workforce like a king addressing subjects. His new executive team flanked him, expressions ranging from smug to indifferent. "Polaris is entering a new era," Barrett began, his voice carried by the marble and glass. "An era of accountability and efficiency. Previous leadership let this company grow complacent, bloated with unnecessary positions and outdated practices. That ends now." He gestured to a screen behind him showing an organizational chart. Entire departments had been collapsed into single roles. Layers of management stripped out. My name, previously shown as COO reporting directly to the CEO, had been shrunk into a tiny box labeled Operations Consultant, contract pending. "The Chief Operating Officer position is redundant in our new structure," Barrett announced. "Operational decisions will run through our Strategy Council, eliminating the need for a dedicated executive role. Nina Ashcroft's employment is being transitioned to contract status, pending review of whether her services are needed at all." 400 faces turned toward me. I stood in the crowd, deliberately positioned among the people I'd worked beside for 15 years. Roger tensed beside me, ready to object. I put a hand on his arm. "Not yet. Furthermore," Barrett continued, "all current employment contracts are being renegotiated. Polaris has been running compensation packages 13% above industry standard. An inefficiency we're correcting. You'll each receive new contract terms. Sign within 30 days, or your position is considered vacated." The crowd erupted, protest, confusion, anger overlapping. People who'd given years to this company were being told their loyalty was worthless, their expertise something to be discounted like bulk inventory. Barrett raised a hand for quiet. "I understand change is uncomfortable, but Polaris will come out of this stronger, leaner, more profitable. Those who embrace this vision have a future here. Those who resist will be left behind. That's all. He turned to leave, dismissing 400 people like an inconvenient interruption. His team followed, shoes clicking against marble toward the elevator. That's when I made my decision. The weekend disappeared into encrypted calls with Lillian and her legal team. Monday morning I arrived at Polaris at 6 a.m., 2 hours before normal business hours, carrying my briefcase, a folder of documents, and a USB drive holding the fully executed trust deed and ownership records. Roger was already at his desk, loyal to the end. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. Barrett's going to lose his mind. Barrett's going to lose a lot more than that. By 7:45 a.m., employees started filtering in for the day. I planted myself in the lobby, the same spot where Barrett had announced my redundancy. I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd bought for my very first board presentation. Back when proving myself felt like scaling Everest. At 8:03, the executive elevator opened and Barrett stepped out flanked by his CFO and VP of Strategy, mid-conversation, probably deciding which department to gut next, until he saw me. His expression cycled through confusion, annoyance, then cold anger. Nina Ashcroft. His voice echoed, deliberately loud, deliberately public. Employees in the lobby froze. What are you doing here? Your access should have been cut off Friday. He snapped his fingers at the security desk. Why does she still have a badge? Tom, the head of security, who'd worked at Polaris for 12 years, looked deeply uncomfortable. Sir, Ms. Ashcroft is technically still an employee until her contract status is finalized. I couldn't revoke access without HR authorization. Consider this authorization. Barrett snapped back toward me, voice carrying across the marble. You're looking at a redundant line item. Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. The lobby became a theater once more. Every eye on us, employees arriving for their shifts, contractors checking in, delivery staff frozen mid-errand. Barrett's assistant appeared with a tablet, likely pulling up termination paperwork. The two security guards approached, apologetic but bound by duty. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder. Barrett, before your security team escorts me anywhere, there's something you should see. It concerns ownership structure and operational authority at Polaris Defense Technologies. His expression was pure condescension. I don't have time for whatever grievance you've cooked up. You're terminated. Leave now or leave in handcuffs, your call. I'm not going anywhere, I said, voice steady and clear. Because as of 4 weeks ago, I hold controlling interest in this company through a properly executed trust deed filed with the state. A&A Holdings LLC owns 51.2% of Polaris Defense Technologies. I am the managing partner of A&A Holdings. Which means, Barrett, you work for me. The lobby went silent. Not the tense, uncomfortable silence, an absolute vacuum of shock. Barrett laughed, actually laughed. That's the most pathetic bluff I've ever heard. Security, remove her. I didn't move. I opened the folder and produced the trust deed, the ownership transfer documents, the state filing confirmation, each bearing official seals and signatures. I held them up so the gathering crowd could see. This isn't a bluff. These are legally binding documents, reviewed by 3 separate law firms and filed with the appropriate state agencies. Your purchase from Howard Gallagher gave you 48.7% of Polaris. The remaining shares were acquired by A&A Holdings over the past several weeks, through private transactions with existing shareholders. The math is simple, Barrett. I own more of this company than you do. Barrett's face drained from smug to pale. That's impossible. I conducted full due diligence. There weren't enough available shares for anyone to challenge my majority. Your due diligence missed the shares sitting in Howard Gallagher's separate family trust, which weren't part of your purchase agreement. It also missed the 23 minor shareholders eager to sell, once they saw what you had planned for their company. Between those acquisitions and my own stock options, we assembled controlling interest while you were busy figuring out how to dismantle what Howard built. Barrett's CFO snatched the documents from my hands, scanning them with mounting alarm, and whispered something to Barrett, whose expression shifted from disbelief to fury. This is fraud, Barrett hissed. You used insider information to manipulate a stock acquisition. I'll have you prosecuted. Every transaction went through proper legal channels with full disclosure to the selling parties, I replied calmly. Unlike your termination of 43 employees without the legally required board approval, which you'd know you needed if you'd actually read the corporate bylaws, or your unilateral rewriting of employment contracts without shareholder consent, which violates Section 12 of those same bylaws. Should I keep going? Barrett stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threat meant only for me. You have no idea what you've done. I will bury you in litigation. I will destroy your reputation. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I met his eyes without flinching. What I've done is save this company from someone who treats people as expenses instead of assets. What I've done is protect 473 jobs from a man who confuses intimidation with leadership and cruelty with efficiency. What I've done, Barrett, is beat you at your own game. His hand trembled, rage or humiliation I couldn't tell. The shareholder meeting is 6 weeks out. We'll settle this there, with lawyers present. Actually, as majority shareholder, I'm authorized to call an emergency meeting when there's operational urgency. Given that you've terminated dozens of employees without proper authority and tried to force contract renegotiations without board approval, I'd say we have plenty of urgency. I pulled out my phone and opened an email I'd already drafted. I'm officially calling an emergency shareholder meeting for Friday, 9 a.m. All shareholders of record will be notified within the hour. Board seats will be allocated by ownership percentage, and operational authority established accordingly. Barrett's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. No, Barrett. You made the mistake when you assumed cruelty was the same as strength, when you confused fear with respect, when you figured you could steamroll people's lives with no consequences. I stepped back and addressed the crowd. For everyone who received a termination notice or contract change, those actions are suspended pending board review. Your positions are secure. Your contracts stand. Polaris Defense Technologies is not being dismantled. Not today. Not ever. The relief that swept through the lobby was almost physical. Roger wiped his eyes. Amanda Westfield, whose name had been on the termination list, grabbed her colleague's hand. Timothy Reeves looked skyward, maybe offering a quiet thanks. Barrett stood frozen, his power play collapsing around him like a house of cards. His assistant tried to get his attention, probably suggesting damage control, but he ignored her, staring at me with open hatred. This isn't over, he said. You're right, I agreed. Friday's meeting is just the beginning. But it's the beginning of something better than what you had planned. Barrett turned and strode for the elevator, his entourage scrambling after him. The doors closed on his furious expression, and he was gone. The lobby erupted, people crowding around me, questions flying, relief and confusion tangled together. I raised my hands for quiet. I know you have questions. We'll hold a proper town hall this afternoon to go through everything. For now, your jobs are safe, the company is stable, and we're moving forward in a way that honors what Howard Gallagher built. Now please let's get back to work. We've got navigation systems to build and contracts to fulfill. The emergency shareholder meeting convened that Friday in the main conference room. Present, myself, representing A&A Holdings at 51.2% ownership, Barrett Thornhill at 48.7%, and Lillian Ashford, attending as my corporate partner and advisor. The lawyers on both sides could have filled a small courthouse. Barrett arrived with a team of 5 attorneys, briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. He'd spent the week hunting for legal grounds to challenge the trust deed, invalidate the share purchases, find some technicality to restore his majority. He'd found nothing. Lillian's team had been meticulous. Our corporate attorney, Gregory Hamilton, who'd served Polaris since its founding, chaired the meeting with formal precision. We're here to address the emergency ownership disclosure and allocate board seats according to current shareholding percentages. As majority shareholder with 51.2%, A&A Holdings is entitled to 3 of 5 board seats. Mr. Thornhill's 48.7% entitles him to 2. Any objections to this allocation? Barrett's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Montgomery Pierce, stood. We object on the grounds that the share acquisition by A&A Holdings was conducted through deliberate concealment, and may constitute securities fraud. Gregory didn't blink. Do you have evidence of fraud? We have evidence of suspicious timing and deliberate non-disclosure. Non-disclosure to whom? Miss Ashcroft was under no legal obligation to inform Mr. Thornhill of her personal investment activities. Every transaction was properly documented with willing sellers. Unless you have evidence of actual fraud, misrepresentation, coercion, or illegal insider trading, your objection is noted and overruled. Montgomery tried 3 more angles: procedural irregularities, questionable valuation methods, potential conflicts of interest. Gregory dismantled each one with the calm efficiency of a man who'd practiced corporate law for 40 years. Finally, Barrett himself spoke up. Fine. You want your board seats? Take them. But I still own nearly half this company, and I will make every single decision as painful as possible. Every initiative you propose, I'll fight. Every budget you present, I'll challenge. You may have control, Nina, but you'll never have peace. I leaned forward. Barrett, you're right that you own 48.7% of Polaris, which means you have a significant financial stake in this company's success. So here's what I'm proposing. You can spend the next several years fighting me on every decision, tanking the company's performance and watching your investment lose value. Or you can sell me your shares at a fair market price, 15% above what you paid Howard, and walk away with a profit. He stared at me. You can't possibly have the capital to buy me out. Ashford Equity Trust does. Lillian slid a document across the table. Our firm is prepared to purchase your entire stake for $68 million, a 15% premium over your acquisition cost. The offer stands for 72 hours. Barrett studied the numbers, his expression unreadable. Montgomery whispered urgently in his ear, clearly running the same math Barrett was, that a drawn-out fight against a majority shareholder would be expensive, exhausting, and probably futile. 20% premium, Barrett countered. $72 million. I glanced at Lillian, who gave the smallest nod. Done. But the sale includes a non-compete clause. You don't get to take our money and immediately start going after our clients or employees. Fine. Draft the papers. And just like that, it was over. Barrett Thornhill, who'd arrived 3 weeks earlier planning to strip Polaris for parts, was selling his stake and walking away. The company would be jointly owned by me and Ashford Equity, governed by a board committed to sustainable growth over ruthless extraction. The paperwork took 4 days to finalize. Barrett signed the transfer documents in Gregory Hamilton's office, surrounded by lawyers but notably alone otherwise. His executive team had already started job hunting elsewhere. Rats off a sinking ship, or in this case, off a ship that had turned out unsinkable. As Barrett headed for the door, he paused. You know what the funny thing is, Nina? I actually respect what you did. Cutthroat, strategic, perfectly executed. In another life, I'd have hired you. In another life, Barrett, you might have been the kind of leader people wanted to work for, instead of the kind they needed protecting from. But you made your choice and I made mine. He nodded once and then he was gone. The following Monday I held the town hall I'd promised. The auditorium was packed. Not just current employees, but some of the 43 who'd been terminated, who'd heard through the grapevine that their jobs might be restored. I stood at the front, looking out at faces I'd worked beside for 15 years. Not abstractions. Not line items. Jackson, who coached Little League on weekends. Amanda, whose daughter had just gotten into veterinary school. Timothy, 3 years from retirement and terrified of losing his pension. 3 weeks ago, I began. This company was bought by someone who saw it as an asset to optimize. Employees were expenses. Loyalty was inefficiency. Human beings were redundant line items. Today, I'm here to tell you that Polaris Defense Technologies is under new management. Management that understands our strength isn't just our technology or our contracts, but our people. I walked through the changes. Every termination Barrett issued rescinded. Every contract renegotiation canceled. The profit-sharing program reinstated. Quarterly town halls resuming. But I'm not going to pretend everything snaps back to exactly how it was, I continued. Howard Gallagher built something incredible, but he built it for a different era. We need to evolve. Not through cruelty and cuts, but through innovation and investment in our people. We're launching professional development programs. We're modernizing our facilities. We're going to compete for the best contracts in this industry, not by being the cheapest but by being the best. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. I won't lie to you. The past several weeks terrified me. I bet everything I had, my savings, my retirement, my home, on the belief that this company was worth saving. I did it because I believe in what we do here. I believe in the people who do it. And I believe a company can be profitable without being predatory. The applause started slow, then built into something that filled the room. People stood. Some cried. Roger was definitely crying. Afterward, Amanda came up to me. Nina, I just thank you. When I got that termination notice, I thought my world was ending. My daughter's tuition, our mortgage, everything hinged on this job. What you did? What I did was protect something worth protecting, I said. You've given this company 12 years of excellence, Amanda. Barrett Thornhill didn't see that. Ido. Over the following months, Polaris transformed. We landed 2 major Department of Defense contracts, largely because our reputation for quality and reliability had never wavered. We launched a mentorship program pairing senior engineers with new hires. We modernized the manufacturing floor with equipment that made the work easier and safer. And yes, we were profitable. Turns out investing in people generates loyalty, innovation, and productivity that no amount of cost-cutting can replicate. 6 months after Barrett's departure, I sat in Howard Gallagher's old office, my office now. The pill organizer was gone, replaced by family photos and a small plant Roger had given me as a joke about putting down roots. A knock at the door. Lillian Ashford stepped in with a bottle of champagne. Celebrating something? I asked. Quarterly results just came in. Revenue up 19%, margins up 7%, employee retention at 96%. I'd say that's worth celebrating. She popped the cork and poured 2 glasses. We toasted to Polaris, to second chances, to the radical idea that treating people well was actually good business. I've been thinking, Lillian said. Ashford Equity's been approached by 3 other mid-sized companies facing something similar to what Polaris went through. Solid leadership, watching helplessly as private equity circles. Would you be interested in consulting? Your operations expertise, paired with your recent experience in, let's call them defensive acquisitions, could be valuable. I turned it over in my mind. Helping other companies avoid what we'd narrowly escaped was appealing. But Polaris still needed me. We were growing, still evolving, and I wasn't ready to step back. Ask me again in a year, I said. Right now I need to make sure what we've built here holds up. But down the road? Maybe. There's something satisfying about beating people like Barrett at their own game. Lillian smiled. You know what's funny? Barrett called me last week. He what? He's starting a consulting firm, advising companies on acquisitions and restructuring. Wanted to know if Ashford Equity would be interested in partnering on any deals. I told him we're very particular about who we work with. We prefer people who see companies as more than numbers on a spreadsheet. What did he say? He said, "You sound like Nina Ashcroft." I told him that was the nicest compliment he'd ever given me, and hung up. We laughed, the kind that only comes from surviving something that could have destroyed you and coming out the other side stronger. A few weeks later, I was doing my rounds on the manufacturing floor. The same rounds Howard used to do, when Timothy Reeves called out, "Nina, come look at this." He was standing at the calibration station, where a team worked on a guidance system for a next-generation fighter jet. The precision required was staggering, tolerances measured in microns, calibrations that could mean the difference between a successful mission and a catastrophic one. "We just finished final testing," Timothy said, pride in his voice. "0 defects. Perfect calibration. This system's going to keep pilots safe, and it's the best work we've ever done." I watched the team carefully pack the unit for shipping, every movement practiced and professional. This was what Polaris was about, not profit margins or efficiency metrics, but excellence in service of something that actually mattered. "You know what Barrett would have seen here?" I said quietly. "Cost per unit, labor hours, materials, expense." He'd have calculated how to make it cheaper, faster, with fewer people. "And he would have missed the whole point," Timothy replied. "You can't cut your way to excellence. You have to build it piece by piece with people who actually care." Exactly. That evening I stayed late reviewing proposals for a new R&D initiative. My phone buzzed with a text from Roger, my assistant who'd left hours before. "Go home, boss. The company will still be here tomorrow." He was right, but I sat a while longer, taking in the office that represented so much more than a title. It represented a fight I'd nearly lost, and a victory that still felt unreal. My mind drifted back to that moment in the lobby, Barrett calling me a redundant line item, while 400 people watched what they assumed was my humiliation. I'd stood there knowing that in a few weeks everything would change. The fear had been real, so had the certainty that I was doing the right thing. I thought about all the Barretts out there, treating companies like conquests and employees like obstacles to profit. I thought about the Howards of the world, builders who poured their lives into something good. And I thought about people like me, stuck in the middle, trying to protect what mattered from people who couldn't see value beyond a balance sheet. The fight wasn't over. There would be more Barretts, more hostile takeovers dressed up as acquisitions, more moments where profit got prioritized over people. But there would also be resistance. There would be people willing to bet everything on doing right instead of doing well. There would be hard-won, precious victories. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. A woman who'd gambled everything and won, who'd stood in a lobby and been called redundant, who'd proven the underdog can have teeth. The elevator descended and I smiled. Barrett Thornhill had wanted to make Polaris efficient, profitable, streamlined. Instead, he'd run headlong into something he never understood and couldn't control. A leader who valued people over profit, who knew a company's greatest asset never shows up on a spreadsheet, and who was willing to risk everything to prove it. He'd called me a redundant line item. Turns out I was the entire spreadsheet. A year later, Polaris Defense Technologies landed a feature in Industry Weekly under the headline, "How Employee-Centric Leadership Became a Competitive Advantage." The piece walked through our growth, our culture, our unusual ownership structure. Near the end, it quoted me. "We were taught that business is war, that leadership means being the most ruthless person in the room. But I've learned real strength is understanding that your people aren't your resources. They're your partners. Take care of them, and they'll build something extraordinary." The article mentioned Barrett Thornhill briefly, noting his consulting firm had shut down after 6 months for lack of clients. His reputation for slash-and-burn tactics apparently preceded him. I framed the article and hung it in the conference room not as a trophy but as a reminder that the easy path isn't always the right one, that courage sometimes looks like a middle-aged COO betting her retirement on a hostile takeover, that the people who call you redundant might be the ones who end up irrelevant, and most of all that in the fight between profit and people, choosing people doesn't mean losing profit. It means building something worth more than money. As for me, I'm still COO of Polaris, though now I'm also majority owner and board chair. My townhouse is still mortgaged, though less aggressively than it was a year ago. My retirement account is rebuilding. And every morning I walk into a company that proves you can succeed without being ruthless. Barrett was right about one thing. I was a redundant line item in his vision for Polaris. Thankfully, his vision never mattered. Mine did. If stories like Nina's speak to you, stories of standing up to toxic leadership, of betting everything on doing right, of proving people matter more than profit, this channel is your space. The Payback Office is built on stories like this because they remind us that accountability exists, that courage pays off, and that sometimes the underdog wins in spectacular fashion. We're building a community of 7,000 subscribers who believe in workplace justice and standing your ground. If that's you, hit subscribe. Every subscription tells us these stories matter, that your engagement fuels more content like Nina's journey. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that work should be better, that leaders should be accountable, and that stories like this one aren't just satisfying, they're necessary. Until the next story of payback, justice, and standing tall when someone tries to make you small, this is the Payback Office.